Ron Paul, the former congressman and physician, has long been a thorn in the side of the Federal Reserve. He sees it as a threat to our freedoms and our prosperity. He spent decades in Congress railing against the Fed. His message was clear: end the Fed. For Paul, this is not just about economics. It's personal. He believes in individual liberty and limited government. The Fed, in his view, is a powerful and unelected entity that controls our money and manipulates our economy. Paul's views may seem radical to some, but they are rooted in a deep understanding of history and a commitment to sound money. He wants to return to a system where the government doesn't control the money supply. He believes this would lead to a more stable and prosperous economy for everyone. This essay will explore Ron Paul's arguments for ending the Federal Reserve. We'll delve into his concerns about inflation, government spending, and the lack of transparency at the Fed. We'll also examine his vision for a post-Fed economy based on sound money and free markets. Ron Paul believes the Federal Reserve was born from deceit and designed for control. He points to its creation in 1913 as a pivotal moment, where power was quietly shifted to a central bank. He argues the Fed's origins were shrouded in secrecy. A small group of bankers met on Jekyll Island, plotting a system that would benefit them at the expense of everyday Americans. Paul argues the Federal Reserve Act was rushed through Congress. He claims there was little public debate or understanding of its implications. He sees this as a pattern repeated throughout the Fed's history. Major decisions are made behind closed doors, with little accountability to the American people. Paul sees the Fed as a cartel. It benefits big banks and the Wall Street elite. He argues that the average American is left to deal with the consequences. These include inflation, economic bubbles, and bailouts for the very institutions that caused the problems in the first place. Paul's historical critique paints a picture of a system designed to favor the powerful. He believes the Fed's very existence is a threat to economic freedom. He wants to expose its flaws and return power to the hands of the people. Inflation is a hidden tax, according to Ron Paul. It's the invisible hand of government stealing the value of your hard-earned money. He argues that the Federal Reserve, with its ability to print money at will, is the primary culprit behind this insidious theft. Paul explains it like this: when the government prints more money, the value of each dollar in circulation goes down. This means you need more dollars to buy the same goods and services. Your purchasing power erodes and your savings dwindle. Paul sees this as a direct consequence of the Fed's policies. By manipulating interest rates and injecting trillions into the economy, the Fed creates an illusion of prosperity. But this prosperity is built on a foundation of debt and cheap credit. Paul argues that inflation hurts the poorest the most. They are the ones living on fixed incomes, struggling to keep up with rising prices. He believes that ending the Fed is essential to protecting the value of our money and ensuring a fair and stable economy. The Fed doesn't smooth out the economy, it creates the booms and busts. Ron Paul's voice booms as he makes his point. He argues that the Federal Reserve, instead of stabilizing the economy, is the main driver of its volatility. He points to a long history of economic crises as evidence. Paul argues that the Fed's manipulation of interest rates creates artificial bubbles. When rates are low, businesses and individuals are encouraged to borrow and spend beyond their means. This leads to unsustainable booms like the housing bubble that burst in 2008. But what goes up must come down. When the Fed eventually raises rates to combat inflation, the party ends. Businesses collapse, people lose their jobs, and the economy plunges into recession. Paul sees this cycle of boom and bust as a direct result of the Fed's interventionist policies. He believes that a truly free market, without the manipulation of a central bank, would be far more stable and resilient. For him, ending the Fed is not just about sound money, it's about preventing economic disasters. Section 5, Behind Closed Doors. The Fed's Secrecy Under Fire by Ron Paul. Ron Paul has long criticized the Federal Reserve for its lack of transparency. He sees it as a secretive institution operating beyond the reach of democratic accountability. He argues that the Fed's actions have profound consequences for the lives of every American, yet its inner workings remain shrouded in mystery. Paul points to the Fed's closed-door meetings and its reluctance to disclose its decision-making processes. He believes that this lack of transparency breeds distrust and suspicion. He argues that the American people have a right to know how their money is being managed and who is benefiting from the Fed's policies. Paul's concerns about transparency extend to the Fed's relationship with Congress. He believes that the Fed often acts independently, with little regard for the will of elected officials. He argues that this undermines democratic principles and allows the Fed to operate with impunity. For Ron Paul, transparency is not just about good governance, it's about freedom. He believes that a truly free society requires open and accountable institutions. Ending the Fed's secrecy is an essential step towards restoring trust in our financial system. Section 6. Spending spree: the Fed's role in government debt, according to Paul. Ron Paul sees a direct link between the Federal Reserve and the ever-growing national debt. He argues that the Fed enables reckless government spending by providing a seemingly endless supply of cheap money. This, he believes, is a recipe for fiscal disaster. Paul explains that when the government spends more than it takes in through taxes, it has to borrow money. Typically, this would lead to higher interest rates, as lenders demand a greater return for the increased risk. However, the Fed distorts this natural market mechanism. By buying government bonds, the Fed injects money into the economy and keeps interest rates artificially low. This makes it easier and cheaper for the government to borrow, encouraging further spending and increasing the national debt. Paul warns that this cannot go on forever. He believes that the current path of excessive spending and money creation will inevitably lead to inflation, economic instability, and a loss of confidence in the US dollar. For him, ending the Fed is crucial to restoring fiscal sanity and putting the nation back on a sustainable financial path. Section 7. Gold Standard: Ron Paul's prescription for honest money. For Ron Paul, the solution to the problems caused by the Federal Reserve is clear, sound money. And for him, that means a return to the gold standard. He believes that gold, with its inherent scarcity and intrinsic value, is the only true form of money that can protect against inflation and government overreach. Paul argues that the gold standard imposes discipline on government spending. When the value of money is tied to a tangible asset like gold, the government cannot simply print its way out of debt. This, he believes, forces fiscal responsibility and prevents the kind of reckless spending that leads to economic crises. Paul acknowledges that a return to the gold standard is a radical idea. He argues that it would require a fundamental shift in how we think about money and the role of government. He believes that the benefits of a stable currency and a sound financial system far outweigh the challenges. For Ron Paul, the gold standard is not just an economic policy, it's a matter of principle. It represents honest money, limited government, and individual freedom. It's a vision of a future where the value of our money is not subject to the whims of politicians and central bankers. Section 8. Freedom and Finance: the libertarian roots of Paul's Fed criticism. Ron Paul's fight against the Federal Reserve is deeply intertwined with his libertarian philosophy. He believes in individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. The Fed, in his view, represents a gross violation of these principles. Paul argues that the Fed is a form of central planning. It gives a small group of unelected individuals the power to manipulate the money supply, set interest rates, and influence the entire economy. This, he believes, is incompatible with a free society. Paul's libertarianism extends to his views on money. He believes that individuals should be free to choose the currency they use, whether it's gold, silver, or any other commodity. He rejects the notion that the government should have a monopoly on money creation. Paul sees the fight against the Fed as part of a broader struggle for individual liberty. He believes that by ending the Fed's control over our money, we can take a major step towards a freer and more prosperous society. Section 9. The rich get richer: the Fed's hand in inequality, as per Paul. Ron Paul contends that the Federal Reserve's policies exacerbate wealth inequality. He argues that the Fed's actions disproportionately benefit the wealthy and well-connected, while leaving the average American behind. Paul points to the Fed's practice of quantitative easing, where it injects trillions of dollars into the economy by buying assets like government bonds and mortgage-backed securities. He argues that this primarily benefits those who own these assets: large banks, Wall Street investors, and the already wealthy. Paul argues that the Fed's low interest rate policies also contribute to inequality. While these policies may make it cheaper for businesses to borrow and invest, they also inflate asset bubbles, primarily benefiting those at the top who own stocks, real estate, and other assets. For Paul, the Fed's role in wealth inequality is a symptom of a larger problem: crony capitalism. He believes that the Fed's close ties to Wall Street and its tendency to bail out large financial institutions create a system where the rich and powerful are insulated from risk, while the rest of society bears the burden. Section 10. A Future Without the Fed. Ron Paul's Free Market Vision. Ron Paul's vision for a post-Fed economy is one of free markets, sound money, and individual liberty. He believes that by ending the Fed's control over the money supply, we can unleash the power of the free market to create a more stable and prosperous society. Paul envisions a world where money is chosen by the market, not imposed by the government. He sees a future where individuals are free to use gold, silver, digital currencies, or any other form of money that meets their needs. Paul believes that without the Fed's interference, interest rates would be set by the market, reflecting the true cost of borrowing and lending. He argues that this would lead to more responsible lending practices and prevent the kind of asset bubbles that have plagued our economy. Paul's vision is not without its critics. Some argue that his ideas are too radical, that they would lead to chaos and instability. But for Paul, the risks of inaction are far greater. He believes that the current system is unsustainable, and that we need to fundamentally rethink the role of money and government in our lives. Section 11. End the Fed. A final word on Ron Paul's crusade. Ron Paul's call to end the Fed is more than just an economic policy proposal. It's a rallying cry for those who believe in sound money, limited government, and individual freedom. It's a call to reclaim control over our money and our future. Whether you agree with all of his views or not, there's no denying the impact Ron Paul has had on the national conversation about the Federal Reserve. He has forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our financial system and to consider alternative paths forward. Paul's message resonates with those who are distrustful of centralized power, who see the Fed as an unaccountable institution that serves the interests of the few at the expense of the many. His call for a return to sound money and free markets offers a compelling vision for a more just and prosperous future.